What is up, MFers, and welcome out to the winter months. Today's video, I am going to give you my entire rundown of the exact approaches, the exact baits, and the exact sneaky modifications that I make to catch fish when the water is cold. If you live anywhere in the country right now, the water's damn cold. That's all I'm gonna say. Now, unfortunately, if you're from way up north, like the Midwest North, you're getting to the point this year in December, into January, February, of course, where you're gonna have ice on a bunch of your lakes. And so obviously we're not doing an ice fishing tip video today. This is gonna apply to those guys as long as the water does not have ice on it, although we have caught fish in lakes that have ice partially on them. But this is gonna apply to when the water is super, super cold. I'm talking 50 degrees and less, all the way down until, we've fished and caught bass in 35 to 40 degree water, no freaking problem. So if you guys wanna see more tip videos like this, hit the subscribe button and please drop a comment down below really quick before we get in the video. Let me know what your favorite winter presentation is. Okay, let's dive into it. The cool thing about winter fishing and super cold water fishing to me is that things have changed so much in what I think, and I think what everybody has thought for decades about what these bass are actually doing under the water in the winter. A lot of that has to do with forward-facing sonar and what it has taught us in the last 5 years, that bass are not dormant creatures. They are not, gonna go ball up against a stump or in 50 feet of water against a rock and wait until it gets warmer outside to go eat. No, that is not happening. These fish are active. They're constantly on the move. Sure, there's days when they're super lethargic, but that happens in the summer, the spring, the fall, anytime. So that's one thing I want you guys to keep in mind as you get into the winter months. Although you may have to move your bait slow, you may have to have a more finessey presentation, or as you're about to see in some of these baits I use here, completely the opposite. The bass really, truly are eating more and moving more than you ever would think underneath that cold, cold water. Another thing that really taught us that, Cole's back behind the camera and he can attest to this, when you're ice fishing up north, you see exactly this. Their fish are constantly moving. Sure, there's different types of species that are kind of sedentary. They're moving, schools of crappie sometimes will sit there, although they move around a lot too under the ice. Walleye will kind of snake along the bottom. We've had days where smallmouth get really tough and they're kind of stuck on the bottom. But one thing remains true, bass are constantly moving around in their environment, and they're not doing that for fun. They are flat out looking for food. So speaking of food, let's dive into the different food offerings and presentations right back here behind me. Now, like I just told Cole, I don't even know where I'm gonna go with this video. I don't have an outline with this or really a specific set plan for how I'm gonna break down all these different presentations that are my juice that I start off with every single time I go fishing in the winter. But I'm just gonna kind of run you through different scenarios and the exact baits that I like to use for those. So, first off, let's get with an old school classic for the winter, for cold water fishing. It doesn't matter if you're throwing in live scope, it doesn't matter if you're bank fishing, it doesn't matter if you freaking live anywhere in the country, stained water, clean water, the cleanest water you can imagine. This guy right here, for me, is my #1 winter cold water bait, and that's the jerkbait. This is a 6 Sense Provoke 106 DD. This is my bread and butter. I don't know how many times I got to tell you guys that. And if I could only have one, it would probably be this one right here, Milliken's Ghost Color. That is the one. This bait will be good anytime in the winter. It doesn't matter what type of habitat you're fishing. As long as you're fishing really under 20 feet of water, this is probably the first bait that I'm going to pick up. There is some nuance to that. So obviously, this is a DD model, so this is a little bit deeper, steeper diving angle model, which means it's gonna get down quicker. There's obviously days when you're gonna be, if you're bank fisherman, if you're fishing a lake that's under, 6, 7 feet in depth, the entire thing, a jerkbait's still a great option, but you're gonna wanna probably go to something with a little bit less steep diving angle lip. Here's my jerkbaits. I'm a crackhead. I like jerkbaits. So in that scenario, something like this is really, really good. That's the exact color that I've actually won tournaments on up north. This is such a good bluegill imitator. I've caught it on shad lakes though too. This thing is absolutely killer. It's all chewed up because we caught a bunch of smallmouth on it and we caught a bunch of walleye on it. It's just an awesome, awesome imitator of perch, of big gizzard shad, of bluegill, of course. That gold, it's Milliken's flasher is this color. But like I was just saying, this is, as you can tell, is just the 106X. It's not a steep diving angle bill right there. So really the keys I'm gonna look for with a jerkbait, I'm not even gonna give super specific scenarios because I truly will throw these every single situation in the winter, but wind blowing directly into a bank is absolutely key. If it's one of those days where it's crazy cold outside, if you're fishing water that's under 45 degrees and you have any type of ripple, I want to get on the bank that has the steepest, the channel swing bank. If you don't have channel swings, then freaking get where it's the deepest jetty, the deepest riprap, the deepest dock, whatever in that body of water where the wind is blowing directly into it. And that's where I will twitch, pause. 2, maybe 3 twitches, pause it. I mean, I used to really be anal about how long I would let the jerkbait sit. And I have had days still where you let the bait sit for 15, 20 seconds before you get that tick. But honestly, with forward-facing sonar these days, I'm trying to get these fish to react to it. I'm trying to move it quick. I almost never pause this bait these days longer than 3 or 4 seconds. Almost never. I don't care if the water's 10 degrees. It would be like, I don't think I could launch the boat if the water was 10 degrees cold. I don't care if the water was negative 10 degrees. I would be throwing this bait, twitch, pause, twitch, like constantly trying to get these fish to react. Because like I said, even though it seems like the fish are cold, they're slow, they're lethargic, they're not moving around that much, not true. They will react and eat this bait. And that's one thing we need to think about as I show you some of these baits. Some of these baits are gonna be straight up soaking baits, bottom baits, really slow moving baits. Some of them are flat out gonna be reaction baits. And so you kind of let the fish tell you that day how long of a suspend, how long of a pause they're gonna want. And really one of the most important things we're gonna talk about in a second too with the big baits is getting yourself some of this stuff right here. All right, I don't have any out right here. Get yourself some of this stuff right here. 6 cents lead wire. I'll link it right down there below. I use it literally every time I go out. It doesn't matter if it's the middle of summer, if it's the middle of winter. It's what I've been using for like a handful of years. I used to use the lead strips, but the wire stays on a little bit better. It's a little bit easier to control than constantly like you stick on that sticker on the bottom, you know, with a lead strip, and then you put it in the water and you're like, oh, it's sinking too fast. Well, then it's hard to cut a little bit off without tearing it off. And once you peel the sticker off, it's not gonna stick on there as good. So I just like the wire. Sinks too fast, undo a little roll, bite it off, whatever. Add a little bit more if you need to. But the reason I like that is I want my bait to suspend almost perfectly in the winter time, because I like my bait twitch, pause, and stop right there in their face. That's one thing with these winter fish. They might be moving around. I'm kind of going backwards here and saying that they are more lethargic, but it seems like in the winter, it's very, very important to have a bait, especially the longer you're gonna let it sit there, that's gonna stop and suspend. Another thing I like to do that we'll, again, talk about with the big baits here in a second, weight them to just barely sink. If you are fishing for fish that you can see on forward facing, this is almost an exclusive forward facing thing, but if you're fishing for anything that's deeper than 10 feet of water, there's not too many jerk baits that can get that deep. But you know, maybe a Megabass +2 or something like that. But I like to just slowly sink them. And I'm talking like a foot every 3 or 4 seconds, not anything fast. You don't want a super fast fall. But in that scenario where I want to get it down really deep, really natural, you want to get the most natural, see-through, silent jerkbait down there to those fish. That's a scenario where I will add it so it just sinks really slow. But that's my deal. And this is my jerkbait rod I throw 100% of the time. Doesn't matter if I'm throwing a 1 ounce jerkbait or even that little Nanahan jerkbait that I throw. I was just showing Cole a 1/4 ounce. That's the MF series, the MFer 6 cents, 610. That's the deal. It's got a moderate fast tip, moderate fast bend. It's just perfect. I've caught thousands of fish on it. It took me a long time to get a jerkbait rod that I really liked. This is the one. And then something that's kind of key as well that I will tell you guys to do. Unless I'm throwing like that +2 size, I'm trying to really get the bait down there and suspend at 12 to 15 feet on a long cast. Every other scenario, I'm throwing at least 12 pound, but a lot of times 15, 17 pound fluorocarbon even. And that's another scenario where, like I was saying with that not as steep diving angle, that shallower 106X, where if you want to keep that bait up high, even like 20 pound line you could go to. But one thing I learned as we're taping this on Aaron Martin's day from him that we're going to talk about too when we're doing some of our twitching baits, the heavier line that you use on your jerkbait, the more control you have over that bait. And we all know, of course, that the lighter line you use, the more natural movement that bait can have. But in the scenario where you're really going to be imparting a ton of action like you are to a jerkbait, a jig head minnow, I'm starting to believe more and more all the time, the heavier the line you can go to, it just gives you more control. I don't know if that's because 15-pound fluorocarbon is stiffer than 10-pound fluorocarbon, and it gives you a more direct connection with the bait. It allows you to, be more responsive with the bait. I don't know what that is, but it holds true. And I don't see situations with a jerkbait where I feel like I would get more bites on 6 or 8 pound test, or even 10 for that matter, than I do on 12 or 15-pound tests. So of course, it gives you more options to horse that fish out of cover as well, which is where I like to throw this thing. So that's one thing I will let you guys know. And then let's just go straight to the big baits right here. So we'll talk about the hangover, the line through situation in a second. But a lot of people think, and I actually had a good conversation on a podcast on Bass After Dark with Keith Thomas, who makes glide baits, and he fishes up in the Northeast. And he had like the exact same sentiments as I did about fishing big glide baits in the winter, or when the water's under 50 degrees, under 40 degrees, a lot of situations. This bait right here, a glide bait, was kind of thought of, I think, for a long time as a bait that has a big, wide, meandering action, right? So it's gonna go side to side. And so we thought that made it bad in the winter time when the water was cold, because fish don't want to eat something that has a lot of side-to-side movement. It's kind of that same idea where you throw a flat-sided crankbait when the water's colder, tighter action as opposed to a big wide action of a big square bill. In reality, that doesn't seem to be true. This bait is deadly effective. I caught a lake record actually 2 winters ago, 14-pounder on this bait in the winter, and I think I caught like 10 other fish over 6-7 pounds that exact same day. I've caught so many big ones on it. But the thing you need to remember about this bait in the wintertime is this bait. That is the same thing. Get it in your head. This is a big jerk bait. And so what I mean by that is it has the same ability to stall and suspend as this bait right here. So what I try to do in the winter, once again, just like the jerk bait, is I try to get this thing as slow as fall possible, because these baits, unlike the jerk bait, obviously they don't have the lip, the propulsion method to dive them underneath the water and then stop. And so you have to sink this bait down. Now, again, just like when I talked about sinking that jerk bait down, I want this thing to sink so slow, super, super, super slow. Sometimes, a foot every 8 seconds, 10 seconds even. It's so slow, it's so painful. But in a lot of those situations, the shallower I'm fishing, the slower I want it to sink. It naturally will dive a little bit. Almost all glide baits will on the pull as you pull it through the glides. So that's another thing to think about if you want to get it down there a little bit quicker. Long, hard pulls for each glide will get that bait down there. But this bait is killer even up north, even when the water is under 40 degrees in the coldest water you can approach. I'm not going to tell you guys to go out there and try to get confidence in a glide bait or have it be the only bait that you have tied on the entire day when the water is that cold, but it truly can be a bait that's going to get you a lot of times even more bites, more 2, 3, 4 pound bites than a jerk bait on certain days. Day in, day out, jerk bait's going to catch more fish for me, but a glide bait is going to catch the biggest fish in your lake, and it's going to give you an opportunity to just give the fish a different presentation. A lot of times too, these shad get lethargic. They start to die off when the water gets really, really cold in the winter. This bait slowly moving, and again, same action, same twitches, twitch, twitch, pause as a jerk bait. Just mix those retrieves in, and again, same spots you're going to throw that jerk bait. Wind blowing in on those areas, standing timber, suspended fish. I've even caught fish on bait balls and stuff in about the middle of winter, or right when it starts to warm up or starts to cool down on this big glide bait as well. So give that a try. See if you can catch the biggest bass that lives in your lake. Okay, next up, let's talk about another big bait I like to throw when the water's cold. I've once again caught fish as cold as the water can get on a line through swim bait. This is 6 Sense Hangover, the bait that we designed. It's an awesome bait in the winter time, and it's gonna be a different type of bait. Unless you're fishing, I mean, even if you're fishing down in the south, in Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Florida, these places where the water's still not gonna get down that often below 45 degrees. A lot of times it doesn't get under 50 degrees all winter. Still a very good time to throw this bait. on the bottom of the lake. These are bottom oriented fish, so I'm gonna throw this bait to. And I will almost always cast this bait out. If you see the fish really dotted up on the bottom or really relating to the bottom, maybe if you're using forward facing, you can barely see them really separating or making that bump on the bottom to come off. That's when I'll try this. I'm moving bait over their heads. And when I'm talking about over their heads, that's the biggest key with this bait. You know, in the summertime when the water's warm, I'll throw this bait over the top of brush piles. I'll throw it 10 feet off the bottom over the top of a school so they can really all come up and get that schooling effect and react to it. When it gets really, really, really cold, the best thing that I've found to do is fish it within a foot of the bottom, 2 feet of the bottom at most. And a lot of times I'm making contact with the bottom. You want this thing to look like those gizzard shad that are down there, struggling to just live their little lives on deep, hard cover, deep, hard structure on the bottom of the lake. So if I'm finding fish that are eating a jig, they're eating a Carolina rig, they're eating a deep crankbait on hard cover on the bottom, hard structure on the bottom, I guess rock could be cover as well, whether that be a point, you know, a hard spot on the side of a ledge, a creek channel ledge where it bends out and the bottom's hard there from washing out. That's when I'll throw this bait. Also a very, very good bait on rock lakes, you know, Ozark, Highland type reservoirs. When the fish are on some of those channel swings, when it's big, chunky, bluffy style rock, not a full-on bluff, but just a deeper channel swing, wind this thing down the side of it, let it freaking boom, 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 make contact with those rocks as much as you possibly can. This bait, again, is another one where you're gonna catch, you can have the ability to catch bigger than average, if not the biggest bass in your lake. Absolutely a killer bait in the winter time, and I keep it tied up all the time. I throw it on this rod here, the 7.7 heavy Milliken series. One big key with this thing is I throw it on a 6-speed reel. Do not throw it on a 7, 8-speed reel. I love a 6-speed. If you got a 5-speed, throw it on that. You're gonna wanna slow wind. I know a lot of people with the hangover, it took a second for guys to figure out the proper retrieve speed so the bait's not wobbling like I was showing you in the release video of it. But you're just gonna let it get to the bottom and then you'll feel that resistance. And if you watch it next to your boat, if you let it swim in the water, you'll feel that resistance, and that's from that head shimmying right and the tail kicking just right. That's that action that you want. And if we're gonna fish it on the bottom, again, fast sink is probably gonna be your best method to get it down there. Although you can fish the medium sink, which is what this is, really, really slow down there as well at that nice, perfect retrieve speed that I like. Just you got to make sure that you're using that slow speed reel to get it down there. But I fished a medium down there, you know, even 20, 30 feet, no problem keeping it down there. So bomb that long cast over that deep structure, slow wind, and wait for that tick. It can be really, really fun. Even Zark can catch them on it. Okay, so let's talk about when the water is cold and it's really, really slow out there. This is a bait that might be one of the best, if not the best, cold water, slow moving fish baits of all time. And that is the jig. But this is the jig that I have been throwing lately with the water up in the 60s, 70s, and I'll throw this one in the summer all the time. This is absolutely not the jig we are going to be throwing when the water gets really, really cold outside. This is a 3/4 ounce, 6 cents hybrid jig. Now this here probably looks a lot different to you. Just kidding, it is also a 3/4 ounce, 6 cents hybrid jig. Let me show you what we're gonna do to make this guy a little bit different once I find my scissors. All right, so this is how the 3/4 ounce hybrid jig comes out of the package. I love that it's 3/4 of an ounce. I love that it's this hybrid head shape so it can sit on the bottom like a football head, but it also comes through brush, comes through grass, wood really, really well. So I'm gonna keep that head, but we're gonna make this thing tiny. I'm gonna cut that thing down to just below that hook bend. I'm gonna cut a bunch of, I'm gonna pull my strands. And this is a hand-tied jig too, which is badass. So you can really get away with doing stuff like this. I'm gonna cut my jig strands on the lower end. So I like to separate them so I can, you know, have all the ones that go above that tie to this side, below to that side. I'm gonna cut the majority of the strands on the bottom out. So that's gonna thin this jig up. And then the weed guard ends up being, you know, more pronounced than the entire jig skirt. So I'm gonna take a lot of that out as well, depending on if I'm fishing deep brush or not, because sometimes I'm exclusively fishing deep brush with this thing. If I'm fishing deep brush with this thing, I'm fishing really thick stuff, then I'll just trim it down the length. anytime besides that I'm fishing, I'm just gonna take about half the strands of the guard out. I'm gonna cut it a little bit out. And the one thing to remember with this is, and any jig, is if you cut just the strands up top, if you cut those down, it's gonna make the weed guard a lot stiffer, so it's gonna be a lot harder to penetrate that fish's mouth, right? So I cut some of these out here first before I ever trim those down. Ideally, I would do it off the back side, but I'm being lazy right now. So we still got that nice big jig hook. I've never straightened or flexed one of these on a fish before. That's how we want that guy looking right there. And then we're gonna come over here and take 6 cents Congo craw. We're gonna look at how it looks next to our jig right there. And we're gonna use this we're gonna make it as short as possible to where it can still sit in that meat of that trailer well. And what I mean by that is, we're gonna look at where it's gonna come out of that bend on the end of this guy. That's where we're gonna place it. And then we're gonna look at where we need to bite off to on this jig right here, which is gonna be, you know, right in that area right there. Mark it with my finger, bite it off, separate our tentacles. Tentacles. We're gonna have our hook spear out right where we marked it, and boom, that's what we're gonna end up with. Now, 2 different ways that I fish this. If I'm fishing deeper, if I'm fishing specifically brush piles, I will rip off these outer tentacles, and it's gonna leave you with just this little double tail flutter kicking guy right there, right? If I'm fishing structure, if I'm dragging it on the bottom, I'm gonna rip the inside ones off like that. And look at this freaking morsel, this little chunk of crawdad right there. It seems to be, the colder the water gets, the more these bass want a short, compact meal with a dragon bait on the bottom. So let's look at that again. We got 3/4 ounce hybrid jig, 3/4 ounce hybrid jig. Exact same bait, totally different compact presentation profile. And this is actually cut down from what I had it at. I had these rubbers down to about there. So yeah, a little bit of difference right there. Now, where I'm going to throw this bait as I tie it on, like I said, brush piles can be absolutely killer this time of year, especially if you're fishing bluegill lakes, because those gills will hang around those brush piles. That's when I'll leave those inside tentacles ready to go, you know, tied up. My favorite place to throw this bait is the same areas we just talked about, fishing that hangover on the bottom, and that is hard bottom areas, whether that be a rock pile, a ledge, anything hard that the fish are relating to. If you get on side imaging, you're seeing them really on the bottom there, schooled up, grouped up on the bottom. That's when this guy is absolutely killer. It catches more fish and big fish for me than a bigger football jig or a lot of other presentations in the winter. I pretty much never throw a Texas rig in the winter. I never throw that free rig. I never throw a swing head hardly in the winter, although I have caught some on it. A jig just seems to be the absolute deal, and it's always been good for me. One spot that I really like to throw these to, if you fish, you know, areas like I fish in Nebraska, Iowa, Missouri, growing up, Kansas, where you only have a few rock piles on the lake. You have man-made rock piles, man-made gravel beds, hard spots. I find the most isolated ones that are closest to the creek channels. That's where this jig is absolutely killer for me. And then I always throw it. This is my jig rod, my offshore jig rod, dragon rod. Throw a Carolina rig on it, swing head on it as well. I'll even throw like a beast hook with anything like that whale, that type size, even a swim jig, a big swim jig rod. That's a 7.5 heavy Lux from 6 cents. I'm always throwing this on heavier line, you know, 17 or 20 pound fluorocarbon line. And then this 8-speed Tatula has been really good to picking up that line. 7-speed will get the job done too, but I want something a little bit faster just to pick up that slack, because a lot of times they will freaking dunk, slack it, come at you, that type of thing with this jig. So that's killer for me. Okay, 2 scenarios I'm gonna talk about if you live in the South and you have what they call drains. a lot of times. And that is, if there's depressions, it's almost like a creek channel that leads into a flat. Usually these are areas near the main lake or on the main lake, and a lot of them have groups of shad, either suspended threadfin shad or even gizzard shad that are kind of up on the high spots on the sides, and they're kind of the threadfin, a lot of times will get in balls that go down on the bottom of those drains. That is when I will pick up these two different presentations. The first one is this guy right here, 500 DD from 6 cents. We also have the 400 DD now, which is a little bit smaller bait and it dives not quite as deep, and the 300 DD as well. All three are really, really good baits for fishing drains and fishing in the winter. The reason I like them for fishing in the winter, they don't have as aggressive a wide wobbling action. They kind of swim down a little bit more as opposed to the baits that have a straight side to side wide action like that, like our C10, C15, C20, C25, all that entire series has that scoop bill. It's really, really wide, has a more wide erratic action. These guys kind of swim down and they get down deep still. On a long cast, I can get this 500 DD down 22 to 24 feet. Generally, I'm throwing it on 15, 12-pound fluorocarbon. And then the 400 DD, this new bait, is kind of an in-between size that a lot of guys were asking for with the 300 DD. The 300, you know, is that 10 to 14 foot diver, sometimes 15 feet on a long cast. This 400 DD is that nice, 15, 14 to, I can almost get it to 20, 14 to 18 foot diving range. So a really, really good option that we've added to the lineup. Very, very good bait in that situation. But you don't have to limit yourself to throwing this in the drains. Obviously a jig head minnow, which we're going to talk about here in a second, has become really, really popular for fishing these fish that are on bait balls. But for whatever reason, the crankbait, just getting a reaction strike with that faster retrieve, that stop and go motion of a crankbait can make those fish go. But like I was saying, you don't need to limit yourself to throwing these in drains. A deep diving crankbait can shockingly be a really, really good bait when the fish are really, really lethargic and they just don't want to eat anything. Where if you give them the time to look at a suspending, slow moving jerkbait and they don't really want to come up and feed up that day, that can be a great time to throw it. If you're throwing a football jig, a Carolina rig, like we just had that jig out, if you're dragging that on the bottom and they don't want to eat, give them too much time to look at it and they just don't want to eat it that day because they're just, I don't know, they're being dickheads. Getting a reaction bite with a crankbait is absolutely the way to go. And I know a lot of guys talk about this, but as cold as the water can even get in the winter, a lot of times down south, speed cranking can be the deal. I usually crank on a 6-speed reel, but a lot of guys will bump it up to a 7 or even an 8-speed reel, which is mind-blowing. That's a big thing down here. And freaking raking this thing down as many drains, as many hard spots, and just covering water on really big bodies of water can be an absolutely killer way to catch fish in the winter. Once again, I like to mix in a lot of stops on my retrieves. Burn it, burn it, burn it, get their attention and stop it when they're chasing it. Stops in their face. They can either, they're gonna eat it or they're gonna be spooked by it. So I like to, on days when it's really, really tough or they're really conditioned or smart, mix in a lot of those stops to my retrieve, because a lot of times these days just a straight retrieve is not going to get the job done. But that's my selection. I throw it on an 8-foot rod. I can't show this one yet, but it's the same actually as a Lux series 8-foot rod that I like to throw it on. And then like I said, 12 or 15 pound fluoro. If I'm really trying to get it deep, I'll go to 12, but 15 seems to be a pretty safe way. I can still make a bomb cast with a 6-7 speed reel on that line and get this 500 DD down over 20 feet. And then the maximum depths out of the other ones as well. So really, really like that. Okay, now another sneaky thing to throw to get a reaction strike in that exact scenario, or even if you're fishing deep grass where a lot of these fish are at, or if you're fishing grass where it's a grass edge, which is a place that largemouth love to go. If you're up north and you're an ice fisherman, you know that those freaking largemouth will get up in 4 or 5 feet of water over the top of some of this grass that grows all winter. But if you have good hydrilla, you have good milfoil that stays green, it stays alive in the winter, this is absolutely killer. And that is, I like a 3/4 or a 1 ounce chatterbait. So a bigger chatterbait, and something sneaky we can do in the winter to just give it a little bit more natural presentation is we'll take that guy off and we'll take this smaller size 6 cents flush, which is a pretty big, it's a 5-inch jerkbait. And we're gonna thread that on the back of it. Once again, I'll look at about where I want it to be. And I like to meet it where the size of the trailer meets the size of the head. That's going to give it the best action and flow in the water. What I mean by that is the same width right there. Gives it less drag in the water so it can have really good action, whether that be hunting or just, you know, a nice natural level even action, which is surprisingly important. And I'll thread that guy on there just like so. In the chatterbait, you know, when I'm throwing it in the winter, of course you can still get those same reaction strikes, ripping it out of that grass or popping it through the grass. But when I'm on a drain, when I'm fishing the deep grass edge, I want to just slow wind that thing, let it bog up in the grass a little bit and just kind of twitch it through there. The same areas, if there's a lot of threadfin shad, even gizzard shad, moving through those areas is absolutely killer for throwing this chatterbait. And this is kind of a thing a lot of guys I think have been doing lately. It's taking that skirt off and just throwing a flush on the back of it. This color is perfect. It's called baby crappie. Obviously it looks like a shad, looks like a crappie, it looks like any type of minnow style bait fish. We also have gizzard shad colors. We have straight white colors if your water's a little more stained. But fishing this on the bottom, same areas as a deep crankbait, same areas that the fish have really pushed up against. You know, they're cruising, they're ambushing shad, or they're ambushing bluegill bait fish up north. This is a really killer bait. It just gets bit, and sometimes they won't eat the crankbait. That's when I'll pull this guy to see if the chatterbait's the way to go. But another way we can get, you know, we can cover water with a bait caster. We don't have to downsize to something that weighs a 1/94 of an ounce. In the winter, this is another way we can aggressively cover water and catch fish in the wintertime. Okay, last but not least, let's talk about when we're in the winter and we have fish on bait balls, or, you know, fish on the bottom that are kind of relating to bait. A lot of times in the Ozark lakes, this has become absolutely a staple in the winter. This is the most important, I think, technique in highland reservoirs in the winter. And that is getting behind your graphs, scanning around until you start seeing those bait balls, those big threadfin shad balls, and then put the trolling motor down and you figure out where the bass are relating to them and where the bigger bass are relating to them on forward-facing sonar. And so there's a couple different approaches I like to this type of fishing. And it's not just you know, super deep Ozark style fishing. We catch them down south over, you know, 2 feet below the surface, over 40 feet of water all winter long on those threadfin shad balls. And so I got 2 specific methods I like to use to target those fish. If I'm fishing for those fish that are, you know, basically you're gonna put your trolling, you're not gonna put your trolling motor on, you're gonna put you get behind your graphs on side imaging, on down imaging and side imaging. You're gonna go to the mouth of a creek and you're gonna follow it back. And generally, you know, you don't wanna get too dialed into the fish need to be out in 50, 80, 200 feet of water in the wintertime. A lot of times they're actually gonna be on like the very last creek channel bend. That's where those shad are gonna be pushed up and staying, but it can change literally by the day. So don't be too dialed into where you need the exact spots you need to be in that creek in these big bodies of water. But in that scenario, I want something that's gonna fall fast and get these fish's attention. And I always start off with this guy right here. This is the 6-cent juggle minnow. That's a 3/8 ounce head that I pour myself. Nothing too crazy about that, but this is deadly effective. The juggle is really good because it falls through the water really quickly. It's a nice slim profile bait, but it also has this this ball, this little flange on the tail. So as it's falling faster, as you're ripping it, it actually gives it a little fluttering action in the tail when you're ripping it. And you can just see me holding it right there. This tail has so much, it's so narrow, it has so much flow, so much kick. They're super durable. You can catch, you know, 10, 15 fish on a single bait on a jig head minnow like this. This is the deal for getting that bait down to those fish quick. A lot of times when they're on these bait balls, they're moving them really quick. This is absolutely key. One thing I will tell you in that situation, especially as the fish have gotten smarter, will continue to get smarter from the pressure, and just being more dialed in on the bait fish, is you need to match the size of this juggle minnow to the size of the bait fish. A lot of times, if you're throwing something this size and you're seeing them chase on forward facing, or you're only catching, you know, 1 out of every 10 or 20 of them, you're like, damn, I should be catching more than that. I can make this thing smaller, no problem. And a lot of times that can make a huge difference. I'll bite a little bit off the head, just once again, so it'll match up to that jig head really nice. So I always do that. But this juggle, which is about 4 inches long, you can bite it way down and make a really small profile. And a lot of times, just going from something that's that size to something that's this size can increase your amount of bites you're getting and fish to commit so much more than you would ever think. So that's another reason I really like this juggle. I mean, and it's been days where I catch so many fish on it that I'm just constantly, I'm eventually biting it down, and then you realize, my God, we should have started off with it 2 inches long the entire time. And it's basically, it's a heavy natural crappie jig at this point, and the tail still has all that action back there. So this is an absolutely deadly presentation to throw to deep fish, the ones that you want to get the bait down to quickly, or you want to get it down and then hold it and kind of twitch it and then kind of just hover it over the top of their heads. That's when this thing is going to be absolutely killer. So anytime I'm fishing more than 15 feet of water, generally that's what I'm throwing, especially if I'm after fish that are on bait balls. Now the other scenario, like I was saying, is we get down here in the winter a lot of times in Texas, and I don't even know why they do this a lot of times, because a lot of times you don't even see the bait balls. A lot of times the fish will suspend, they'll just be blasting around chasing bait up over the top of creek channels. It might be the main river channel, it might be the main channel in the creek, but basically I do the same method. I'll scan around, it might be down by the dam, might be out in an open basin on a smaller lake, but I'll scan around until I see bait balls, and then I'll drop the trolling motor and I'll start looking around. And that's when I'll, you know, if I'm fishing for fish that are within 10 feet of the surface, I'll throw this new bait from 6 cents. It might actually be out by the time you guys are watching this. I'm not really sure, but it should be very, very soon. If not, it's the Aussie, that new 6 cents Aussie. And the reason I like this bait so much is it's called the Aussie. It's for oscillation is what that's short for, not just the kid with the coolest hair in the game. So what that means is when you pop the bait, it's gonna roll, which gives that bait just a little bit more secondary action. The tail still, as you can see, kind of like the juggle, has a nice tapered approach. It's got that same ball on the end, so it's gonna have a nice kick, a nice shimmy. But this thing is great, and the reason I like it for that oscillation is not just the secondary action, but when you pop it, when it rolls, it's gonna allow that bait to stall more in the column. Instead of going forward, it's gonna go sideways and forward, which is gonna stop that bait, let it hover, flutter a little bit more over the top. And this is an 1/8 ounce jig head. I'll usually start with an 1/8 because I can really bomb it out. I can get a kind of a sense for how these fish are acting. I can put it on them quick, start the day like that. A lot of times you don't ever need to switch from that, and that's great. But I'll go down to a 1/16 ounce a lot of times too, especially if they're tougher. That's the biggest thing for me. When they're tough, when they don't want to bite things that you know, they should be eating, but because they're scurrying around on the surface, you know, 2 feet below the surface, and they just won't eat your bait. You're like, what the hell's going on? A lot of times lightening up is the first thing that I'll do. I'll lighten up, then I'll downsize, but going to a 16th or even a smaller jig head can be the deal. Obviously you're going to need something that can throw that jig head really well. So when I'm fishing this lighter style, I will go with a lighter line on my braid. Now again, like I was just saying, I've kind of figured out and kind of like having that heavier leader. So I'll still go to like a 10-pound fluorocarbon leader on this thing, because I want to have that the ability to really impart that action, impart that twitch, and have control over my bait. But I'll go to a light like freaking dental floss leader, main line on my braid. And the reason for that is I want casting distance. Casting distance is really, really hard and really important when you're throwing something that's a 1/16 of an ounce. That is a nice thing about this Aussie. It's a pretty, you know, a fairly good sized bait. It's a little bit over 4 inches long. As you can see, it's got a lot more meat to it. Oh, where my flesh? Oh, my juggle. It's got more meat to the bottle than this juggle. And so it does way more naturally. That's another reason I like it for this situation. You can get it out away from you, even with a super light jig head, yet it's not gonna, it doesn't have any higher of a specific gravity than this bait, so it's not gonna sink faster. It's not loaded with salt or anything anymore. But yeah, you can fish this thing, you can bomb it out there, and you can do the exact same thing I was just talking about with the juggle. If the fishing's really, really tough that day, you can bite it down to something that's, you know, this length. You still have that tall, nice shad profile. It's still gonna roll. But yeah, this bait is going to be deadly. It's going to catch thousands of fish for people across the country. I'm so excited for you guys to get some of these in your hand. And if they're available, because I know they're supposed to be available to start the mid part of December. It already is the start somehow. It's like a weekend. That's crazy. But yeah, those will be available very, very soon. It's not going to be after the new year. It'll be before Christmas for sure, so you guys can get out, get loaded up on these. It's going to be a nice cheap way for you to have a bait that performs like some of these, you know, $3, $2 a piece, impossible to get JDM style baits. You're going to be able to go out and get something that has a similar JDM style action at a much lower price and just freaking catch the shit out of them on it. Okay, that's it. That's what I got for my winter cold water fishing approach. If you learned something in this video, again, go hit the subscribe button. It lets me know that you liked the video. You want to see more videos, tip videos like this. I love breaking these techniques down, but I'm only going to do it if you guys want to see them. So do that. And then don't forget to drop a comment. Let me know your favorite wintertime presentation, if I touched on any of those, to go out and catch some more fish. If you want anything I talked about in this video, I'll drop links to everything down in the video description. And if I don't talk to you before then, enjoy getting that Aussie. I know those things are going to sell like hotcakes, and enjoy your Christmas time. So we have plenty of videos out before then, but me and Cole still got a lot of traveling to do. We got some pre-practice we got to do for the Classic before the first of the year, and just a lot of cool, exciting stuff coming up. So thanks for watching, Meffers. I'm out here. Peace.